Welcome to the 3030 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Dr. Ruiz.
Hello everyone, super excited for my interview today. My guest today is Dr. Caroline Leaf. She's a communication pathologist and cognitive neuroscientist with a master's and PhD in communication pathology and a bachelor's degree in logopedics. Since the early 1980s, she has researched the mind-brain connection, the nature of mental health, and the formation of memory. She was one of the first in the field to study how the brain can change with direct input. Her work goes beyond mindfulness and quick fixes. She focuses in making your brain work better, which is the only way to create change with lasting effects. Also, this is the last week to win the amazing VIP experience at PaleoFX. PaleoFX fueled my passion for medicine, and it was the springboard that launched my career as a functional medicine practitioner. This year's conference brings the biggest names in health. Confirmed speakers include Dr. Alan Christensen, Rob Wolf, Mark Sisson, Ben Greenfield, Dr. Michael Ruscio, and me. I hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hello everyone, super excited to be back. And what better way to start 2019 with talking about learning and about, how to take advantage of that awesome machine you have between your ears. And what better way to do that than to have an expert, Dr. Caroline Leaf. Dr. Leaf, how are you?
I'm so good, and how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, fighting a little bit of a cold, but, I think I'm kicking it. I had a nutrient IV, I had, some good adrenal support and some rest, and I think it's I'm fighting it pretty well. So, hopefully I don't sound too muffled in this podcast.
No, you sound great. So you're obviously what you're doing is helping you.
As a tradition, I start with, what is your hero story? How did you get into this health field, and what are you trying to accomplish? And what was like the wake-up call for you to pursue what you're doing?
Well, it began 30 years ago when I was still doing my undergraduate research, and I was starting to look at the concept of the mind-brain connection, which back in the 80s was considered rather crazy. I was told that that's a crazy idea. That's a ridiculous concept to try and look at the mind-brain connection, because the brain can't change, and your mind is not separate from your brain. And even though history, as we know, the science of history has gone through different approaches to understanding this whole mind and brain, and what is the mind and what is the brain. So I was doing a lot of research with people with very, very challenging problems, from injuries from car accidents and motorbike accidents. We call that traumatic brain injuries. People with injuries from sports injuries, people with severe mental health issues, from traumas. I worked extensively in South Africa at that stage. I come from South Africa, and I worked extensively in the very poor areas, extremely poor areas, poverty-stricken, suffering from the apartheid era in South Africa. People that were traumatized, raped, AIDS, hunger, starving, terrible socioeconomic conditions. So I was immersed in an environment of trauma, working with people immersed. I should say I was working with people immersed in an environment of trauma. And in my practice, I practiced clinically for 25 years. And in parallel to my practice, I did a lot of research with the people that I was working with and in the field, to show the resilience of the human mind, and to show that the mind and the brain are separate, and that the mind actually, when you deliberately and intentionally use your mind correctly, you can actually change your brain function, and also your body function. And so the power of the mind over the body. So what really was, there were so many incidents that really triggered my love of this field. And I think, one of the few highlights is when I was working in the poorly performing areas where I worked for 25 years. I would go to these places that people didn't come out of alive. That's how dangerous it was. And I did that for 25 years. I was always protected. I never had a threat to my life ever, even though many people had been murdered in those areas. And it was because I brought a message of hope. I would go to schools, because we would use schools, and then we would have whole communities, thousands of people packing in just to sit for hours listening to the message of how your mind works and how your brain works and how to learn and how to think and how to cope with emotional trauma, and how you can, even though the socioeconomic situations were so terrible that they could control their reactions. And one day, one young girl walked into, or literally crept into one of the classrooms where I was working with a whole group of people, and she was bleeding, and we thought it was her menstrual cycle. So one of the teachers and leaders basically took her out the classroom and put a blanket around her, and next minute she was back in the classroom, and the teachers basically told me that she had been raped on her way to coming to my session, and that she was determined not to miss it because I was so well known in those areas, and she was determined not to miss it. So she sat at my feet for a whole 3-4 hours just listening to every word that I said. And stories, I can tell you hundreds of stories along those lines, very emotional stories of people's determination and hunger and desire to understand how to function as a human, the power of the mind, the resilience of the human mind. And I saw those communities transform. I saw people that were drug addicts and pimps and that were abusing other people change and get educated and transform their communities, and that hunger and passion was very fueling for me to continue to try to understand how to help people that are in extreme circumstances, try to help them to cope emotionally, as well as how to improve their mind so that they can learn and educate themselves in order to help them change their circumstances. Because as humanity, we need to have a look at ourselves and realize that we are hungry for knowledge. We're surrounded by knowledge and we respond well to knowledge, and our brain is designed to absorb and to grow in response to us learning. And when we learn, when we build our brain, then we are actually really improving our mental health as well. So I always have a two-prong approach now. I've written many books, and I do conferences around the world, and a TV show and podcasts like you, and all the time my fundamental message is to teach people that we are very resilient. We have a very strong mind. Our mind is not our brain, but our mind works through our brain, and with our mind we can actually change our brain, and that we need to be detoxing our brain daily, and we need to be building our brain daily. And that's a very big bird's eye view of what I do, and in essence what I'm therefore doing is helping people to develop their mental health and to teach them the power of their humanity and the power of their mind.
So let's backtrack a little bit, okay? What is the difference between your brain and your mind, and maybe in a very non-sophisticated way? Like, what the way I understand is that your mind is like the software and your brain is the hardware.
Well, that's a very commonly used explanation, and it's not wrong, but it's actually a little bit more advanced than that. You can look at your brain as being a very sophisticated computer, but you have to look at it. We actually talk about the brain, the parts of your brain where memory are built. We talk about that as a fancy word. We use the word quantum neurobiological computer. But your brain isn't just one computer. Your brain is actually billions upon billions upon billions of incredibly sophisticated quantum neurobiological computers. So you've got this hardware that is extremely complex, but it's not your mind. Your mind is your thinking and your feeling and your choosing. So your ability to think, your ability to feel and experience emotions, your ability to make choices, your free will, that is your mind. So your mind then works through the hardware of your brain. They need each other. They are separate, but they are integrated. So as you right now are listening to me and your audience is listening to me, you are processing my words, but what that means is you're thinking about what I'm saying, and you're experiencing some emotions, and you're making some choices, and it's happening very, very, very fast. And as you do that, you actually you are pushing like what we call quantum energy in through your brain with your thinking, and then your brain responds, and with all kinds of electrical and chemical energy in the different structures of your brain. And then your brain responds with all this energy, and it actually builds networks in response to the action of your mind. So if you dead, there's no mind moving through your brain, so your brain doesn't grow anymore. But while you're alive and you're thinking and feeling and choosing, which you do 24/7, you're always thinking, feeling, and choosing. During the day, you think, feel, and choose actively and consciously. And at nighttime, you're thinking, feeling, and making choices on what we call a non-conscious level. But all of this is energy that is moving through your brain. And then your brain responds by storing all the things that you build, all your memories, as physical structures inside of your brain. So they're two separate things. One is physical, your brain's physical, and your mind is what we would call non-physical. And from the research and the work that I've done over the last 30 years, we see, myself and a lot of researchers in this field, we see that the mind, which is your thinking, feeling, choosing, this almost intangible thing, is the 99% of who you are. So it's the biggest part of you. And then your brain, which is the physical, is about 1% of you. So the mind moves through your brain and the brain responds to your mind.
And that's pretty amazing, because just to, I really wasn't expecting that the mind was that much bigger than the brain. Now, how can your mind affect your health, and how can your health affect your mind? It's pretty obvious, like if you have a TBI, that that you can affect your mind, but how can your mind affect your brain and the way you feel and the way you move through this world?
So that's a great question. And if you think of the most simple, to come back to the example you used earlier on about being the hardware and the software. So the brain is the physical, part, and the mind is this incredibly powerful quantum energy that's moving through your brain. So your brain actually can't do anything on its own. So this is the easiest way to understand it. Your brain can't do anything on your own. It's like a computer. Until you switch it on, it's not going to do anything. You are the one who's switching it on. You are deciding what to type on your computer, what search engines you're going to use, what you're going to do research on, what you type into. You driving the activity in that computer. So your thinking, your feeling, your choosing, your decisions, what you're studying, your knowledge, your whatever you're using your computer for, that is your mind in action. And you are actually switching your computer on and you're making it work for you. So the way that your computer works for you, your brain is working for your mind as well. So there's a similarity, but the computer in front of you right now, for example, you and I working from our computers while we do this interview, is not even remotely as smart as just one tiny neuron in your brain, which is very minute. So our brain is filled with incredibly complex computers, but they still have to be activated by your thinking and your feeling and your choosing. So if you are, what we see from the research, which is very, very interesting, and that is that our brain is made up of all these structures and all these cells and all these chemicals, and same with our body. So, and we have a lot of cells in our brain and our body. We have around about 75 to 100 trillion cells in our brain and our body collectively, which is a lot. And what we see is that the structure of the brain and the body can't do anything without the mind activating it. So as you are thinking and feeling and choosing, the brain and the body are responding. We actually cause our thinking, feeling, and choosing is causing activity in the brain and the body. So we see that all these cells, all these parts of the brain and the body are only designed for healthy thinking. The scientists call it wired for love. We wired for love. So we don't have any chemicals or circuits in our brain or structures in our brain or in our body or anything in our cells that is not wired for love. In other words, we are naturally designed to think well, feel well, and make good choices. But you and I both know that doesn't happen all the time. So we make a lot of good and bad choices. And whatever choice we make is the result of our thinking and feeling. So the choices fall in the realm of the mind. Remember, the mind is three things: thinking, feeling, and choosing. And we are designed to think, feel, and choose well, and in a healthy way, in a wired for love way. And our brain and our body are designed to align with that. So they in like a balance, an equilibrium. And if we choose to react incorrectly, like if we get irritated or frustrated or anxious or worried or or we've experienced something involuntary, like a terrible trauma, maybe a rape or an abuse, or poverty, or like that, whatever terrible, all the terrible things that can potentially happen to us. Those are all negative, toxic experiences. It's negative experiences that we process through our thinking, feeling, and choosing. So we receive and process it through our thinking, feeling, choosing mind, that 99%, and then it moves through your brain. So we receive it and our mind processes, and it's working with the brain, and we basically build that experience as a physical structure into our brain. And the structures we build are inside the brain, built onto the neurons of the brain. And they look like trees. So our thoughts that we build in response to life experiences look like trees. So we designed to build healthy trees because we're wired for love. So when we react incorrectly, when we react or when we experience an involuntary trauma or something, we still build that into our brain, because whatever you experience as a human going through life, you're going to physically build that into your brain. But it can be built, if it's built in a toxic way, it's damaging to the brain and the body, because your body doesn't have any circuits for any of those toxic things. So you build this distorted tree, like a really gnarled, broken down, and it's still alive and functioning, but it's not healthy, versus a healthy green tree. We designed to build the green trees. We have the structures and the chemicals and the proteins and the enzymes and all that stuff for healthy thinking, but not for toxic thinking. So when we do respond incorrectly, or we do experience trauma, involuntary trauma, because no one wants to be traumatized, you don't voluntarily get traumatized, then we create these toxic trees in our brain, which do cause damage in the brain and the body, throws the brain and the body into neurochemical chaos, and it increases our vulnerability to disease and mind issues by a very large percentage. 75 to 98% of illnesses come from our thought life. So there's a massive connection. But before that sounds too negative, and I know you've got a lot of questions, so I'm just going to say this statement to just help people to have a positive, leave them with a positive flavor in their mouth. Otherwise, it feels so, it's kind of scary. You have tremendous control. You have tremendous resilience. Those toxic thoughts from toxic experiences or toxic choices that we've made that build physically into the brain and the body, into the brain and influence how the body functions, can be changed, because our brain is neuroplastic. I did some of the first neuroplasticity research back in the 80s, and what that means is that neuroplasticity means your brain can change. So at any point, one can heal from those things. You can change that toxic structure into a healthy structure and bring health back into your brain and your body.
So when someone has, everyone knows someone that is constantly having negative thoughts, like every time someone says something, they'll have something negative about that action, or, they'll always see the glass half empty. Is that self-perpetuated?
Yes. So the people that see that, and I talk about that in my new book, Think, Learn, Succeed. I talk about that as a mindset of seeing that like negative expectancy, and that's not natural to the brain, not at all. What's natural is for us to see the glass half full. That's our natural design. So what we do is we develop habits of thinking. And we all understand what a habit is. It's something that we constantly, something that we do all the time. And a habit has to be actually built. It's not just automatically there. We are designed to build healthy habits and not toxic habits. But when we practice thinking in a certain way, and we may not be consciously aware that we're practicing being negative, but if we get into the habit of daily saying, oh gosh, this always happens to me. Oh, this always goes wrong. Oh, look at this again. And you see everything that happens during the course of your day as that glass half full or something negative. You're literally wiring that into your brain, and the more you think about it, the more it grows. The principle operating here is that whatever you think about the most will grow in your brain. So if you're thinking daily in a negative way about everything that happens to you and seeing it through the lens of the glass half full, and it always happens to me, like the example I gave you, etc., that it's always bad, it's always negative. Oh no, look at this. So everything that goes wrong. Maybe a bulb goes in your house, light bulb goes in your house. Oh, that always happens to me. Well, that's quite a normal thing. Or someone maybe scratches your car by mistake. Oh, that always happens to me. Well, these are things that happen in life. But so instead of seeing it as, okay, this is just, this is the wear and tear of life, they're seeing it as something negative that's happened to them. So they've practiced using that and created a habit. Now, habits form over 63 days, not over 21, which we've been led to believe. That's a myth. It takes about 21 days to build a long-term memory, but to build a long-term memory into a habit takes 63 days, and minimum. It can take longer, but that's kind of the minimum amount of time, more or less, that we need to build a habit, and that's about 9 weeks. So if you consistently over a 3-month period thinking in a certain way, and you're not controlling or regulating yourself doing that, you just do it, you have built a very strong network in your brain of being negative. And if you keep doing that, it's got a lot of energy. Whatever has a lot of energy dominates your thinking. So as you go through the day, this very powerful negative mindset is constantly almost like the sunglasses that you're putting on to view the day through.
The example that it comes to my mind is someone saying, "Oh, it's raining," or "Oh, it's raining." It's the same sentence, and you can completely see it in different ways, especially here in Arizona. Where we don't get a lot of rain. You can see all the positive things that come from rain, or you can see all the negative things that come from rain. Now, I naturally, long as I've thought about this, I am wired pretty positively to a flaw almost, where I always see the good in things, and I always super excited, and I'm always, and I do have people in my life that are not. Now I have heard that being a little bit too optimistic can put you in danger, and being a little bit defensive or negative can be a coping defense mechanism to try to lower expectations. Is this true?
Well, it's how you look at it, and it's how you define what you've just said. So someone who is unrealistically positive is going to is kind of using that almost those positive affirmations or that positive way of speaking as a band-aid, and using it to avoid the issue, and that is negative. But so if you, let's say that you experience something that's very traumatic, or you experience something, or you're in a kind of financial cash flow situation, or you have an issue with a family member, these are very real things, and to pretend that they don't exist is damaging to your brain and your mental health, because you've got to deal with the stuff. But to acknowledge it and to process it, and then to move forward positively by looking for solutions, is what we naturally designed to do. And that's looking at the glass half full. But if you say, if one says, okay, well, I'm just going to ignore the situation, I'm just not going to think about this, or you get into a negative cycle where you just talk about all the potential negative things that could go wrong, and you talk yourself into a hole, that's obviously going to be very damaging as well. So the concept of being too optimistic as being negative is only in the sense of being optimistic to try and almost kid yourself, or to try and almost, train yourself to not deal with the issue that's there. So it's, if you say, okay, this is a problem, I acknowledge that this is a problem, but what can I do about this problem? That is being positive. To say, this problem doesn't exist, I don't believe it exists, it's all going to be fine, and then it's all going to be fine, but you never really deal with it. That's negative.
And that's and that's so powerful, especially when it comes to illness, because if someone is diagnosed with cancer, you can't just will it away, but having a positive attitude and trying to come up with a plan, or trying to come up with a way of dealing with the problem, is going to give you a better chance of surviving.
Absolutely. It's doing that positive, taking those positive action steps, but also your mindset's very powerful, because it plays a massive role in influencing the health of your cells, of your body, and controlling the cancer cells, and also in getting in allowing the medication to be effective. And I mean, you know that yourself, being in the field that you are, that the power of the mind and intentions over the body is massive. And whether a person decides to use medication or not use medication, the person's mind is the most powerful part of the whole process, because it influences the effectiveness of medication. So there's a lot of research showing that with the placebo nocebo effect, which is where your for example, let me give you a simple example where they've done surgery on people, for example, knee surgery.
Yeah, that's
and
a
they've
great
had
example.
Yeah, it's a great, because it's actually happened here, but it happened at Baylor University not too long ago. They did a very interesting study where they took two groups of patients that had knee issues, and the one group of patients received the surgeries, and the other ones were also put under anesthetic, were on the operating table. The scalpel was lifted and held in the doctor's hands, but no actual cutting happened. But the doctor spoke as though it was happening. So when the two sets of patients came around, the experimental group and the control group, they all were healed, but the one lot didn't have any surgery. And I mean, there's many, many research studies showing that just the fact that they actually believed that they were having the surgery led to the healing of the body, or it improved the effectiveness of the medication or whatever. So the mind is playing. A lot of research now is showing that the mind, in terms of medication effectiveness, in terms of healing, the mind is playing a 75 to 98% role in that. And we're not taught enough about our mind because we live in a very reductionistic, materialistic world, which is a fancy way for saying we're focusing too much on the physical and not focusing enough on understanding the power and the resilience of the human mind. And that's a very important part in health and happiness. And it's also one of the contributing factors to mental ill health, is not being allowed to process things correctly, not actually dealing with the fact that our mind is so powerful, not bringing the power of the mind into our physical healing. All that kind of thing can lead to a level of toxic blocking in the brain, slow down our healing process, make us feel frustrated and unhappy because we're working against the natural way that our body functions.
Well, in the way I see it is that we don't have a mechanism for the mind, and all of the drugs that are SSRIs, or they have a sort of mechanism, something that our no pun intended, our tiny brains can comprehend, end up failing miserably. Because we want to have this is A and this is B and this equals C, and we're missing B, so let's add more B or subtract it, and that's not how it works.
Not at all, because that approach that you've just described so well is what we call the biomedical model, which looks at it works very well for medicine. So if you've got cancer or diabetes or something like that, you can.
I would argue that it works really well for infections, and that's about it.
Yeah, but it works. So it works in terms of the physical, but it doesn't work in terms of the mind. And that's the thing. The mind plays by a different set of rules, and what they're trying to do is take that over into the mind. And so, as you've said, that you can't say, what you've just described earlier on is the myth of the chemical imbalance, that we're told when people are depressed, they're told that they have a chemical imbalance, and if you just add some antidepressant, you're going to get some more serotonin and you'll be happy again. And that's just absolute nonsense, because you have to look at the person's whole story. Now we have to acknowledge that depression is very real. What that person is going through, they're experiencing that sadness, they're experiencing that anxiety. This is very real. What they've experienced is very real. We need to acknowledge people's stories, and we need to have compassion and understanding for what they're going through, not just slap on a label after a few questions and say, these are your symptoms, therefore you're clinically depressed, therefore take this medication. That's not helping people, because those drugs are brain disabling, which means that they basically damage the physical brain, and they don't help you deal with the problem, and the problem is still there anyway. So whether you numb it or not, when the drugs wear off, it's going to come back, and you have to face it. We need to recognize the complexity and the uniqueness and the story of each human, and bring that into mental healing.
So, you mentioned that we're wired for love, or we're wired to be positive thinkers. How does this correlate, or how does this relate to stress? How does stress come into play? Because everyone thinks of stress as being something bad.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you've asked that, because that is exactly the case. Stress is a very important thing. Stress is actually very good for us. What makes stress bad for us is our perception of the stressful event. So we've had the perception of what stress actually is. So we've had years and years of conditioning that stress will kill you, stress is bad for you, I'm stressed, it's going to make me die, it's going to affect this. And we have so much out there in magazines and freely available in the media that have actually created a tremendous fear of stress. So as soon as people face issues, which is daily, let's face it, the human condition is filled with, every single one of us is facing mental health issues daily, because mental health is not something out there. It's something that as humanity, we're going through day-to-day living, and we're faced with challenges. And if we make a bad choice, our mental health suffers, and that's everyone. On a day-to-day basis, we are facing the human condition, and we're facing all these stresses of life. So our body is designed to cope with stress. We have all these incredible responses in our body. The cortisol starts flowing, which increases our ability to breathe faster, which increases our oxygen to the brain. Our blood flow increases because the blood vessels around our heart dilate, so we have more blood flow to the brain. Those two issues, the extra oxygen, the extra blood in the brain, will help us to have more cognitive flexibility, which means we can think better. We have more, we can have our thinking process improves. We can pull on memories that we have of existing situations that we've gone through to help us to function in this new situation. We just think more clearly. That brain fog lifts. Our body we have genetic switches that turn on in our brain that increase our resilience in the stressful situation. So all of the stressors, if we operate in the correct stress response to the stressors, the body will work for us and not against us. But if we say, oh no, stress kills me, I'm so stressed, and that heart pounding, adrenaline pumping, shoulders tensing, blood pumping into your brain, all those physical sensations that we experience, if you are conditioned to thinking those are bad for you, those are going to kill you, the research shows that just that thought, just the perception that, oh, this is bad for me, makes the body work against you instead of for you. So instead of, for example, the blood vessels around your heart dilating and pumping blood to your brain, by you saying, okay, this is stressful, but I can handle this, I'm going to get through this. Even if you're crying and screaming and shouting, I call that freaking out in the love zone. You're actually making stress work for you. But if you say, oh no, this is terrible, the stress is going to kill me, that perception then causes the blood vessels around the heart to constrict instead of dilating. So now instead of a lot of blood flowing to your brain, you've got less blood flowing to your brain. You have less oxygen flowing to your brain. So your cognitive flexibility, your ability to think through things, your ability to have wisdom and make good decisions, all that you get that brain fog. All of that is going to happen negatively, and that then makes the situation worse and worse. So now you are at risk for maybe some issues in your heart, some issues in your brain because of the lack of oxygen. So just our perception. The new science of stress shows that we can make stress work for us. It's good for us. It helps us to be alert and focused and be on that like high alert state for that moment of time that we need it, and then to calm down again. Just by our understanding that and realizing, okay, this is going to work for me, telling myself this will work for me, shifts the whole stress response into a positive, normal, natural mode, which brings health as opposed to the toxic version, which is very destructive, the toxic. And you can get out of the toxic version of stress very quickly just by saying to yourself, okay, it's okay to feel like this. This is good for me. This is going to make me alert. This is going to make my brain more focused. This is going to help me find the solutions, even if I'm screaming and shouting and crying and so on. So it's a different angle.
So, I guess I don't want to call it stress because people get stressed if I call it stress, but exercise is a stressor. You're breaking muscle, you're exerting yourself, and as long as you're not doing something that is going to hurt you, that good stress is going to make you stronger.
Well, that's the thing, and even the word stress, I like to demystify that word stress and tell people to embrace it. Stress is a good word. Stop seeing stress as a negative word. See it as a good word, because stress is physically designed to help you to cope, to help you to be sharper, alerter, more alert and stronger in that moment. As you've explained with the muscle, the exercise, there may be a period of pain, but you're going to get through that pain. And you with your mind can make stress work for you or against you. But that starts with people saying, okay, stress is not a bad word. Stress actually is going to make me stronger and have a clearer mind and find those solutions. And that shift is incredible in helping people. That mindset shift of stress, seeing stress as positive, is extremely important in helping the body to function more efficiently. So we see from research that just by having that attitude that stress is good for me, it's working for me, I'm going to be sharper, more alert, more clear, more focused, your body is in a healthier state than if you say, oh, the stress is terrible, stress is a bad thing, I'm feeling stressed, oh dear, on top of the problem, I've got all this stress, my body's going to break down. We mustn't do that. We must say it is a problem, but this stress is good. I'm going to make it work for me. So can you see the subtle shift there?
Yeah, definitely. Especially because there are stresses in our life that we cannot change.
Exactly.
And they are gonna keep coming at us, like traffic. You cannot change it. Having to pay bills, you cannot change that. You can help yourself and mitigate, and come up with strategies to so maybe you are leaving for work a little bit earlier. But worrying about something you cannot change is only going to create those bad trees.
Exactly. It'll create the toxic trees and create the toxic habits, and then they become toxic triggers, and the whole thing just becomes a negative cycle. But you can change that anytime. And that's the beauty of the power of the mind-brain connection, is that when you make the decision to go to work a little earlier, so you're not going to be caught in that traffic, or that act of and seeing your heart beating faster, and your your muscles tensing up, not as something negative, but as this is going to help me function quicker. I'm going to be able to answer that question more efficiently. I'm going to be able to do that presentation to my boss more efficiently, or whatever it is that you're doing, I'm going to be able to respond to that, whatever trauma you're facing in your daily life, etc. Because we all know life's challenging. That's why people are constantly looking for ways to cope with life, and why we have landed up with a very abnormal situation in mental health, where mental health is seen as a disease. Meanwhile, it's not a disease. Ill health is not a disease. It is a very normal human condition, and we shouldn't pathologize or medicalize something that's going through daily life, which is tough, and we need to learn how to cope with it and connect with each other and help each other cope.
Are there any exercises to try to change the plasticity of your brain and try to reshape those trees?
Oh, absolutely. I've got 30 years of research behind developing techniques, and I put them into my books. And in my book, Think, Learn, Succeed, I have a lot of great exercises. In the first part of the book, I have a whole lot of exercises on mindsets. There's 15 different mindsets that I've researched, and I have little activation tips. So, for example, in the stress mindset, how to activate stress positively in your life, or expectancy mindset, how to have that half glass full attitude. And then in the second part of the book, I talk about the gift profile, which is a profile I did with my patients that I developed to help them to understand the power of their mind and the uniqueness of how they think, and the power of when you understand how resilient you are and how uniquely you think, and to understand how you learn, you can apply that in terms of daily, just understanding, being able to recognize how strong you actually are in your mind. In the third part of the book, I talk about 5 steps that I developed years ago as well for my patients to help them to build effective memory. So I developed a process called the 5-step switch on your brain learning process, which is a technique that is 5 steps that help you to build memory effectively inside your brain, because we designed to learn. So when we talk about learning, and we started off this podcast by talking about the importance of learning. Learning is something that we designed to do as humans all the time. We're always learning. You're reading books, you're learning new things, you're listening to podcasts, you're doing things at school, at work. So we are learning. Humanity learns constantly. And what we see is that we have a lot of control over the quality of our learning. And if we learn in the correct way and stimulate our brain correctly, we build a lot of health into our brain, which carries over into good mental health as well. So the 5-step process that I've developed is all about the science of thought, or how to actually build memory. And we go through that's a great strategy to learn. With what I advise people to do, which is what I advise my patients to do in the 25 years of practicing, and which I now advise people around the world to do, is to spend at least an hour a day building your brain, using these 5 steps to actually build memories into your brain. So when I talk about building your brain, I'm talking about learning information, thinking about it deeply, understanding it, and practicing using it so that it is useful information in your brain. Not like when you read a Twitter feed and you just read all these headlines, but you don't really think about it. And what social media has done, you can look at your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, and there's just this information coming at you, bombarding you. That's not going to be very good. That's not very good for your brain. And we see from the research that it's changed how we think. I also talk about that in my book, Think, Learn, Succeed. I'm talking about as you're looking at that Twitter feed or Instagram feed, if there's something that grabs your interest, click on that article and read it in depth and think about it and learn and try and understand and memorize that information. That exercise in itself is excellent for brain function.
I wanna rag on social media, because as health professionals in this functional medicine space, we rely heavily on social media, and in order to connect with our patients and in order to, get our message out, because that's how information is distributed. But sometimes, we kind of abuse it, and we substitute, social media for connection. And, those 5,000 friends on your social media, they're not your friends. What's the importance of human interaction, and do you think it's a big problem that that social media is kind of substituting some of this human interaction?
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely like in anything in life, there's the good and the bad, and you already mentioned some of the very good things about technology. It does keep us connected. However, we're so connected that we disconnected.
Yeah.
So we've got to watch that side, that we don't get disconnected. The research shows that disconnection has created patterns of individualism, and as humans at our core, we are designed for connection. And we designed for that the interaction, that face-to-face human connection. So yes, let's have the connection on technology, but let's not let it completely replace that human interaction, which is what it's doing in a large portion, lots of societies around the world. So we see, for example, in the United States, that it's become one of the most what we call individualistic societies, where people are isolated even though they're connected because of not having the depth of the interaction. Our youth in this country are the loneliest, amongst the loneliest in the world, because of the connection, because of not building a proper human connection. One of the greatest ways of combating depression, for example, is decent human connection, decent, deep, loving, supportive human relationships. Well, it will also change the way that we think. In my book, Think, Learn, Succeed, I talk about this in technology a lot, and I talk about the thinker mindset, where we as humanity are designed, our mind and our brain, this whole relationship, we're designed to think deeply, to be deeply intellectual. Humans are deeply intellectual. We're designed to think about things and appreciate technology and science and the sunset and poetry and art and relation. We're designed to really think about these things and appreciate them. And when we don't take the time to really think about these things and discuss them and have that human contact, we change the way that our brain functions. We actually damage our brain. And we're seeing a change where people battle to spend time just spend time with doing nothing except daydreaming. And daydreaming is an incredible way of developing your intellect and developing your creativity and healing your brain and giving your brain a rest from the bombardment of the stimulation that we have in a very advanced technological age that we live in. And that's changing. That's something we need to bring back, is teaching people to just sit and think. There's one research experiment where they showed, and I quote that in the book Think, Learn, Succeed, where they put different people from the ages of early teens up to the age of around about 78. So it was a wide age range of people, and they put them individually into rooms, and they took all their technology away. So all they had was themselves. So they just had to sit and think, and they only had to sit and think for 16 minutes. And the majority of people hated it. They hated sitting. Can you believe it? They hated sitting and thinking because they're so used to just grabbing their phone and getting that empty stimulation that creates, and it's designed, as you know, Facebook, and I mean, the way the phones are designed, it's like a slot machine. And it's designed like that on purpose to get that dopamine rush and to build those habit patterns in the brain and so on. And that's something we can break, that habit. We can use our technology, but it needs to be controlled, and we need to make sure we are balancing it with some good, deep thinking. And that's why I always advocate you have to build your brain every day for at least an hour, and you have to detox your brain for about 15 minutes a day. And that's a package that those two, it's like a no compromise in order to have mental and physical brain health and body health.
So what do you do?
So each day one should, besides, I know you're very into nutrition. So just quickly on a side note, I also have written a book called Think and Eat Yourself Smart, very into nutrition as well. So I totally agree with your principles on that. We have to look after the physical brain and body, and obviously the earth that we live in. In addition to that, we have to build our brain every day. So that's learn something every day. And that's what I recommend that they use the 5-step process, because that's actually how you build a memory into your brain. So taking something that you are interested in, if you're at school, it's easy because you're learning anyway. In the corporate environment, you have the chance, you're learning new stuff every day. So challenge yourself to learn something new every day for at least an hour, whatever it is. Maybe it's a second language, maybe it's whatever. And it's thinking deeply. Very important that people realize that they need to really come to grips and challenge themselves with that information, that they get to the point where they could actually take that article, for example, and give a little mini lecture on it. That's always the sort of measure that I tell people to use. Read something to the point where you can actually talk about it in a very logical way, that you could have a conversation about that you could explain it to someone else. And then the other side of the coin is we need to detox our brain every day. Because we're wired for love, our brain's not designed for those toxic trees that I spoke about at the beginning of the interview. So we need to get them out of our brain. So we use our mind to detox our brain. And that's the same 5-step process, but you're taking that the toxic thought, and you are becoming aware of it, you're breaking it down, and you reconceptualizing it. And reconceptualizing means that you're not ignoring it, you're not obliterating it, you're not suppressing it, you're not dragging it, you're actually facing it, dealing with it, and redesigning it in a way that it becomes part of your story, but you can manage it. And so that was a bad habit you used to have, but now you no longer do that. But you still remember how you used to do it, but you don't do that anymore. You've redesigned it, you've reconceptualized it into the positive version, and you practice using the positive version. Or if you've been through some sort of trauma, you can't suppress it, you can't drag it away. It's still there, it's still toxic in your brain. You have to get that, create awareness of it, reconceptualize it, and redesign it. Now, the reason that the detoxing is only 15 minutes, more or less, you can go a little longer, but around about that time, is because of the emotional content. Every single thing we're dealing with in our mind that's a thought, every memory has information and emotions. And if it's toxic, those toxic emotions can be overwhelming. So as not to overwhelm, it's recommended that one keeps that under control. So I have a program called the 21-Day Brain Detox, which I have it's just being released very soon on an app called the Switch app. In the meantime, I have it in a book called Switch on Your Brain. And it's a process that I did with my patients, that I developed clinically and researched it. And I'm actually currently now doing another set of clinical trials with a group of neurologists and neuroscientists, with patients using the 5-step process to detox the brain and help with depression and anxiety. And it's not medication, it's using your mind, the power of your mind, to wire out those, identify and reconceptualize those toxic thoughts. So humans are brilliant. I mean, humans are so powerful. We don't realize our resilience and our strength. And we have to face the pain, that nagging, that depression and that anxiety. These things are not things that we should try and squash. These are warning signs. These nagging anxieties and depression are signs to us that something needs to be dealt with in our life. And it's painful and it's hard. And we need the support of loved ones and so on. It's not going to be easy, but we can do it. That's very strong in my messages, that we are very able, with the support of community and the support of understanding how to use your mind, we can change these things in our life.
It's so interesting, how we can take something as amazing as the internet or social media and all of this stuff, like your cell phone, having all those notifications on. That dopamine hit is so hard, and you are just, magnetized and mesmerized, and you want to go and grab your phone and see who liked your picture. I tell the story that it's almost been 2 years. I turned all my notifications off, so there's no notifications on my phone. And then and I kind of like stop using my phone as much. And now I have to actually go into the social media app, and now all my notifications pop up, and now I'm like there for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes answering stuff, okay? And then there was an update on the iPhone to turn off all apps using like child control or child locks, So now my first hour of the day, I don't have access to any apps. And that has made me so much more efficient in the mornings, because what I noticed is that a lot of my emails come in, like 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, you'll get 8 emails. And then around 9, there's a second batch of emails. and a third of them or 2/3 of them are spam. So I was spending, and you still have to read them. And instead of batching, instead of like, sitting there for 2 minutes and then 4 minutes, now I batch and I can eliminate all that spam so much more efficiently. And that's because it is easier for me to cancel all that noise and shut off all those notifications and force myself to not be able to use my phone than to use my willpower to not do it. And that's incredible. And you're doing sort of like the same thing by creating an app, because let's use this amazing technology for good.
Exactly. So to use it for good, and but you used your willpower to make that decision, to the way that you manage your emails, the way that you manage your the alerts, the notifications. I mean, I do the same thing. That you actually, it's a discipline. You've used your willpower to do that, and you've created a system that works for you, and that's what we need to do. We are able, and that's an excellent. People each that's really great advice you've given. I actually give very similar advice in my book, I Think, Learn, Succeed, in how to deal with social media, and it's one of the things you have to work out a way of not being distracted constantly by social media, and just make a decision. I'm going to look at it for 2 hours a day, but I'm going to look at it over lunchtime and the evening. I don't know, work out a plan like you've worked out your plan, which sounds excellent, and it's working for you. We all have that ability, and then it's great, and then it's something that's positive for you, as opposed to just that mindlessness, which is so toxic to the brain, which is causing depression and anxiety, because what it's doing is, and it's not a disease, it's not clinical depression and anxiety, it is a warning sign. When they say that children or adults on social media are have increased levels of depression and suicidal thoughts, etc., it's because that medium constantly being used for up to 8 hours a day in this mindless way is creating toxic waste inside the brain and building up and causing disturbance in the brain, because the brain's not designed for that. The brain's designed for connection, for deep thinking. The mind is in a deep thinking mode. So when the mind is also not in this intellectual deep thinking mode, but is in this mindless mode of just scanning through information and being very influenced by people's edited photos and so on, that is bad for the mind and bad for the brain, and creates the toxic waste. So by bringing in a level of discipline like you're describing, you then take control back instead of being controlled. And it's going to take a bit of time. I'm sure you found yourself that it's not that it's going to be overnight. It's going to take you at least 3 weeks to get yourself into a decent pattern for managing social media. And then it's going to take another 6 weeks to get yourself to stick to that habit and to find and to make it a lifestyle. Because as I said, it takes at least 63 days to form a habit. So a lot of people give up and they think they are controlled. And that's another very strong part of my message, is that you're not getting depression from the social media. You don't have clinical depression. You're probably feeling depressed because your brain is feeling traumatized, overwhelmed, and is getting toxically damaged. And if you get your social media under control, you'll find that depression and the suicidal thoughts and that kind of thing will start lifting, and that you'll find that there's other issues that are underlying that you've been avoiding. And so you can start one by one dealing with these issues. But people are using social media like a drug. To avoid an avoidance issue, don't want to face what they need to face, so just get distracted, and that's tremendously toxic too. Because if you think of something that's, let's give a very simple example. If there's something rotten in your fruit bowl, you have an orange that's got moldy and you don't remove it, all the other fruit that you keep piling on top will eventually be affected. It's still there, and everything else gets affected. And that's what that toxic thought's doing. You can put as many drugs on top of that toxic thought as you want. You can put as many social media hours on top of that toxic thought or that moldy orange as you want, but it's not going to go away. You have to find it, deal with it, get rid of it, and reorganize it, and then you start changing and be capable of it. Humans are so capable of that.
Yeah, Brendan Burchard described social media and emails, especially in the morning. Like, imagine being a teenager, showing up to high school. The first thing they give you is all your homework. So those are your emails, and then you start comparing yourself to everyone else in the high school, and that's social media. So who wants to begin the day with that stress?
I love that. That's a great explanation. Yeah, it's very good.
So let me ask you, what'd you learn today?
What did I learn today? I was learning, I'm writing a new book. So I was doing a lot of research for that new book. So I was actually learning a lot about, and a lot of new things about the brain and the mind and memory. And so I did a lot of, I do about 2 hours of research every day on the mind-brain connection in my field. And we were having a creative meeting as well today in our business. So we were thinking of very creative new ideas and things like that. So it was very, very stimulating. Then I was preparing podcasts and things. So I've spent a lot of time today developing my brain
That's awesome.
and learning, and it's very stimulating. It's very exciting.
And then second, we're almost at the hour mark, and I don't want to take your time. This is so fascinating. And maybe we can have you like in 6 months. We'll open it to Facebook and we'll ask people to give us questions, and maybe I can have you back if you're not too busy writing another 10 books. But as a neuroscientist, okay, what are some memes or what are some like myths that just drive you up the wall that people say and you're like, no, actually, that's not true?
Okay, well, one of them, and that's I'm so glad you asked me this. I actually talk about some of these neuromyths in my book, Think, Learn, Succeed. But the one of them is that we right-brained. People will say, "Oh, I'm right-brained" or "I'm left-brained," and you can't be right or left-brained because the whole brain works together all the time. Which leads to another myth that people say that we only use 20% of our brain or
Yeah,
1% of
love
our
that one.
brain. Yeah, which is also not correct scientifically at all. Our whole brain is working. The problem is that we don't use our brain properly. We damage it with not learning, all the things we've been talking about, not learning, social media, not dealing with our issues, all that kind of stuff makes us feel like we're not using our brain, but we're not using it properly. That's the difference. So, and then the other thing is learning styles. People often talk about, oh, they're a visual learner or a auditory learner, and that couldn't be more unscientific and more damaging, created tremendous problems in the education system.
I love that.
You can't be a visual learner. There's 7 types of thought, and all 7 types of thought work together for you to process a thought. So, and visual and auditory are just 2 of them, and every human uses all 7 every moment of the day at huge speeds in their different way to produce the unique thoughts that they basically think.
Oh my goodness! I've been fighting this fight for so long. When I was at school, there was a lot of push to have like comprehensive teaching or all inclusive teaching, and we were forced to have lectures, and then every once in a while they would ask us to pull out a piece of paper and let's draw something, and I was like, this can't.
Yeah, it's fabricated. Yeah, it's called reductionism, as you probably know, I'm sure, but it's reducing down a very complex concept to something that's very simplistically applied, and it's created a massive problem in our education system. And I've been speaking against this for 30 years. On top of my mental health work, I've done a lot of work in education, and this is one of the biggest myths that I've had to fight in schools, with teachers, with students. It's really limited students, trying to bring that that limits people's potential. So yeah, that is something that people need to get beyond. So when people say to me, I'm an auditory learner, I say, no, you cannot be an auditory learner. That's the same as saying you only eat with your tongue. You do not only eat with your tongue. Your whole digestive system is involved in eating. So it's the same sort of concept.
So, last question, before I let you go. Is PowerPoint killing our students, or what would be like the best way of teaching at school?
Well, one of the best ways of teaching at school is basically getting students to be stimulated to think deeply about the information. So we must realize that when you go to school, you're going to learn information that you don't know information about. So you've got to be given information in order to have a discussion about that. So the delivery of a basic foundation of information needs to happen. What is currently happening in the education system is that they're given worksheets and they have to fill in missing words and teach to the test. So they kind of trained to in a very decontextualized way. We need to get back to good old-fashioned reading textbooks. We need full-on textbooks with lots of information, and we need to read those textbooks and discuss them and answer and discuss that and make a lot of notes and have lots of interactive discussions about the information so that the students can literally chew that information like a dog chews a bone. And that's very critical. I talk about that a lot in my book, Think, Learn, Succeed. I talk about the current school systems and education and learning and delivery of information as well. Such an important thing.
I always thought that memorization or having to memorize things, it's just fake knowledge.
Yeah, if you don't understand what it means, there's a certain level of memorization that has to come, but not without understanding. So when you understand, you naturally will remember it. And so the repetition comes in getting a deeper layer of understanding versus just repeating something like a parrot. So it's totally different. When you understand deeply, you will remember, as opposed to just memorizing, and using tricks to memorize. It's going to give you a level of exercise for your brain, but it's not going to develop your brain. It's not going to bring you that satisfaction intellectually that we crave.
Well, Dr. Leaf, thank you so much for this interview. This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
I can't wait, to read your book. I can't wait to have you again. And, where can people find you? How can people get a hold of you? Where can they buy your books?
But they can go to my website, drleaf.com. We've got a store there, and my books are available in every bookstore, that pretty much all over the place, and online and at our bookstore. And there's lots of information on my webpage. I have a podcast as well, Dr. Caroline Leaf, TV show on YouTube as well. And we have lots of social media, the normal social media that everyone can follow. So yeah, drleaf.com is the good place to start.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed the interview.
Thank you.